Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1964. We're going to be taking a look at the Beach Boys and they're going to be performing Surfin USA. So let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on.
If anybody had an ocean across the USA, then everybody be surfing like California. You'd see them wearing their baggies, Warachi sandals too, a bushy blonde hair, surfing USA. You catch them surfing that day, over a county line, Santa Cruz and Fez, Australia, Caribbean, all over Manhattan, down the Meaning Way, everybody's gone surfing USA. Well, I'll be planning on a route we're gonna take real soon. We're waxing down our surfboards, we can't wait for June. We'll all be gone for the summer, we're on safari to stay. You tell the teacher we're surfing USA. Agonies and swans, Pacific Palisades, San Francisco, down on Beach LA, all over the world, at Miami Bay. Everybody's gonna surfing USA. Surfing USA, yeah. Surfing USA, yeah. Surfing USA.
And there we have it. So it's a quick performance for tonight, but there is so much in there. But here we've got the proof that they can all play and sing, and the fact that we've got two rhythm guitars going on, and Carl, the way that he plays lead, he's absolutely got all of those lead chops down. And bearing in mind that when they did have the Wrecking Crew, who were those session musicians that came in and played the Beach Boys tracks, their production turned into something a little bit more complicated than just a 4 or 5 piece band, so they had to get a lot of people in to get all of those different instruments down. By the way, little footnote about Glenn Campbell, because he was part of the Wrecking Crew, and check out his playing. Back to these guys and playing live, because Carl joined in with the Wrecking Crew. He was at that ability to rub shoulders and play at the same level as professional session musicians, so he definitely had the chops down on lead guitar and also playing rhythm. And the fact that we've got 2 guitars here in this 5-piece setup means that we get a really cool split between the bass and one of the rhythm guitars, which Al is playing furthest left of the screen here, because he's playing the octave above what Brian's playing on bass. So you get that really cool split. You just get that running bass line that's just emphasized with that second guitar. And then you've got Carl, who's playing the lead that we just saw there, really competent lead as well, like I mentioned about playing with the Wrecking Crew, but also the way that he's throwing in the rhythm, having that split between solid rhythm playing from Carl and Al playing those bass line notes, but obviously an octave higher, really does fill in the sound. We haven't got a great mix here, but if you were hearing this live, it'd be great to hear all of these elements. And now, very few bands ever get up to this point of having 3 great backing vocalists who all harmonize with each other underneath a lead vocalist whilst playing their instruments at the same time. So let's not underestimate how great these guys were in 1964 at pulling off this sound live, and their technical ability on their instruments independently. And with Mike Love's lead vocal, he's got that vocal range that absolutely sits exactly where it needs to be because of the harmony lines that we've got coming in. And the harmony lines are absolutely the selling point about the Beach Boys, the fact that they could be so different because they had three guys that could harmonize with each other in the background whilst you have that lead vocal over the top. And like I said, the ranges just seem to work. Another thing to look out for in this video is the way that Brian is supplying that classic high, I would say falsetto, but it's a really clean head voice sound that he gets. So for the tagline of that chorus, you're always listening out for it, and Brian hits it so effortlessly. He just floats into those really high notes, and it's really cool to watch. And then obviously we've got Al and Carl supplying their harmony lines as well. So even though the mix isn't great here, we can still hear all of those melodies just interacting with each other, but also the fact that they are absolutely spot on. And that's something to mention about the playing and the singing at the same time. I always say it doubles the difficulty, and you can see that Brian is doing those walking bass lines whilst supplying those harmony vocals. Same with Al, playing exactly the same lines on the guitar whilst supplying harmony vocals. And I always say it edges the difficulty up a little bit more when you're playing single notes, playing riffs, and you're singing at the same time, rather than just having to play simple bar chords or open string chords at the bottom of the guitar, where you can just let that right hand go in terms of that rhythm, and you don't really have to worry about your vocals as much because you just tell your right hand to do what it wants. Whereas when you're picking out notes of a riff, some of those will go against what you're singing, so it becomes a lot more difficult. The Beach Boys are one of those bands that started to really push the envelope in the recording studio, because up until the 60s, bands would get together in the studio and they'd perform 3 or 4 songs, and those 3 or 4 songs were the record. It was just got down in that way. Whereas the Beach Boys were one of those bands who started to look at overdubbing and recording 2 or 3 or 4 guitar parts, bringing in other instruments and harmony vocals, multi-tracking those as well. And the sound that they got with this production really started to turn the recording studio into more of an art form, in terms of now whatever you can imagine, you can potentially get down in the studio, no matter how many guitar parts or vocal parts or orchestra parts you want in your track, you can now start to do this. And especially in the 60s and the late 60s, the Beatles were a great example of this as well, really pushing the boundaries of the sound in the recording studio. The standout track that really did indicate the difference in recording capabilities in the studio was Good Vibrations. Have a listen to that track. Even now, listen to the production on that. The amount of stuff in there is absolutely crazy. And I'm not talking about just instrumentation. I'm talking about the song and the way that it progresses and the different elements in there. It goes all over the place, but it is so cool to listen to, and one of those tracks that when it was played on the radio absolutely stood apart from everything else because of the production and the way it had been put together. And just a quick bit of information about this track, Surfin USA, because I'm sure you're already aware that this was a Chuck Berry track originally, and it was called Sweet Little 16. But Mike and Brian got together and started putting some different words over this Chuck Berry track that they were listening to, and they really liked the sound of it, so they decided to record it and released it in 1963. So you can imagine that the publishing company who owned the original track by Chuck Berry, they realised that, hang on, this is just the song that we own, but you've changed the words. So then from 1966 onwards, so 3 years after the release, it is then labelled and credited as Surfin USA, written by Chuck Berry. And all of the rights were actually signed over to Arc Music, the publishing company, this version of it. So the words that Mike and Brian put together, all of it is now owned by that original publishing company because it was originally their song with Chuck Berry. But I don't think there was any ill will between the Beach Boys and Chuck Berry, because they were playing around the same time and they did bump into each other at a gig, and Chuck said that he really enjoyed the version that they made and just liked the track overall. So I think it's just the business side of things. Always tends to be the case that just the publishing company wanted to make sure that they weren't missing out on anything, having had their song effectively taken over and just changed ever so slightly. And it's great that we can go back and see a video like this that really does show that the Beach Boys could absolutely play their instruments live, could harmonize live. The mix isn't great, but it doesn't need to be, because you can hear all of the elements are absolutely spot on in there. And also how the term has changed in terms of what you think of when you say boy band, especially my generation and the generation nowadays. You just see four guys standing up on stage singing to a backing track, whereas back in the 60s it was a totally different thing. The boy band were a band who also sang and could harmonize with each other and were the total package just in one. And these guys were one of the ultimate bands. I think they've been estimated of selling between 100 and 350 million records. So they've sold so many that those two figures are so wildly different, but nobody knows because they've sold so many. You can't keep count of it. And I think it's a common misconception that Dennis didn't play drums or that he didn't play on any of the recordings in the studio. He certainly did get involved in the studio, and we can see here that he definitely can play. And when you factor in live here that he's keeping it tight with Brian on bass, and the fact that Brian's singing at the same time, it really is an impressive rhythm section to keep it tight the whole time when so much is going on. But Carl and Dennis did get involved in the recording process in the studio, so all you have to do is watch this video to see that these guys can play. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.